If Oregon's going to be as good as it can be in 2024, Matthew Bedford needs to come back healthy, eventually.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, right now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We'll talk Jurrion Dickey a little bit later on, and Bo Nix is crushing it. So far, so good. I'll talk about that later in today's show. And let's get started, because I feel like the Matthew Bedford injury could be something eventually we'll look back and say, okay, Oregon was fine. Oregon was fine. Spencer, you're being a little overdramatic. When I think about Michigan and Ohio State, which in the reverse order, Ohio State then Michigan, are the two hardest games on Oregon's schedule, and Vegas agrees with that notion, by the way. 1-point favorite against the Buckeyes at home, 3.5-point favorite on the road against the Wolverines. I don't think there are going to be a lot of other betting lines this year that are as close as that. I don't even know which one would be under 5. If the Wisconsin line on the road is currently at 10.5. When you think about those two teams in particular, the ones that are most likely to beat Oregon, why are they so good? Why are they so good? Well, Ohio State has got a nasty defense. You know what else they have? A really good front four. And when you look at Michigan, you've got one of the best front fours in all of college football. Mason Graham, the defensive tackle for Michigan, is perhaps the singularly most disruptive interior defensive lineman in the country. So for those who do not know, Matthew Bedford sustained an injury during fall camp. I don't know that it was one particular moment. There were reports that he was, just kind of on crutches or in street clothes all over. But then, Dan Lanning was open about the injury and what's going on. And the quote that went around, I think James Crepea first said it, of the Oregonian, he said, quote, "They expect him to play at some point this year." I get major Justin Jacobs vibes here. And for Oregon to hit its ceiling, I'll feel a lot more confident if he comes back healthy on a particular schedule. So, does Oregon need Matthew Bedford to be healthy by the time they get to Big Ten play? Maybe. My preference in giving me all the confidence I need that Oregon's offensive line will be the sort of unit that it's expected to be, which is one of the 10 best in all of college football, Bedford has to be back by the Michigan State game. And the reason I picked that one is if he returns for the Ohio State game, I think that's a rude introduction to your college football season to say, here you go, let's throw you into the fire against Ohio State. On the flip side, he has played against Ohio State before, and he's a sixth-year player. So my concern there, while still present, is slightly lessened because of his career. But if he misses the first 3 games, Idaho, Boise State, at Oregon State, that shouldn't make an impact. There should not be a player in the trenches on any of those teams that can be so disruptive that whoever fills in for him, which I'll get to in just a moment, is not able to hold down the fort. But Ohio State, Michigan, yeah, it's the case. And Justin Jacobs, we kept hearing last year, he's going to come back, he's going to come play. This is the game. And eventually it was the Washington State game. That was halfway through the year. Oregon was 5-1 at that point. So if it takes that long for Bedford to get back, you're looking at facing an Ohio State team that is one of the best defenses in all of college football. It is certainly not outside the top 3 on paper. And you're going to have a backup offensive lineman. Not a fan. If you were talking about an injury to Terrence Ferguson, or an injury, well, T. Ferg maybe not the best example here, but if you were talking about an injury to one of Oregon's running backs, if you were talking about an injury to a receiver or to a corner or to one defensive lineman, like one of the sophomores, for instance, I wouldn't feel as worried because of the depth that is there. But when you look at the options to replace in the interim, Matthew Bedford here, which will have to happen at least for the first couple of games, probably more than that. Davey Uli, as of this past Saturday, has not been a full go. He's working his way back from a toe injury. And then you look at Nishad Strother, who transferred in last year from East Carolina, and he didn't really play much last year. Who knows if he would have actually made the depth chart, but he got injured going into the season. So you have two guys that already have an injury history, a recent injury history, who could fill in for the guy that is currently injured. Now, Davey Uli, this is not his first year of college football. He's not a redshirt or true freshman trying to make some big step up. He has played, he's a former blue chip recruit. This is the sort of timeline that you expect offensive linemen to be ready for. And if Iuli is healthy, I would think, this is just my gut, I would think he is the guy that replaces Matthew Bedford before they'd go to Nishad Strother. But that may not be the case. There could also be a freshman that works his way up the depth chart. We have seen each of the last 2 seasons a true freshman make an impact along the offensive line. So it's clearly not impossible. And you can look at names in the 2024 cycle and say, maybe one of them surprises. I mean, Poncho last year, Iapani Lalaulu, also known as Poncho, Oregon starting center this year, was the 6th offensive lineman last year. Davey Uli was the 7th. And Poncho was a true freshman last year. I talked about the offensive line extensively on the show going into last year. I didn't have that on my bingo card. I wasn't talking about, oh yeah, Poncho's definitely going to play. No, that one was kept pretty well under wraps, at least from my vantage point. And then all of a sudden, he had a role. So someone's going to have to step up. And a question I get frequently on the show is, how important is high school recruiting now that you've got the transfer portal? And is it the same? And what's the balance and whatnot? This right here is where high school recruiting comes into play. Now, Nishad Strother was a transfer last year from East Carolina. Matthew Bedford is a transfer from Indiana. But when you have injuries, the odds that you go to a transfer on your depth chart are pretty slim, right? It could happen in this particular instance, but having a Dave Uli, or maybe they feel like a Devin Brooks is ready in his second year. I don't know. Only Alik Terry knows who's going to fill that particular spot. But if you tell me that, it's a position that over the first 3 games when Bedford is expected to be out, he might be back by the start of Big Ten conference play, which would be great. He gets to play against UCLA, he gets to play against Michigan State. Neither one of those teams is going to be strong along the defensive line. You got to get your feet under you, get into the flow of things, work within the offense, all that sort of stuff, and then play Ohio State. I'll feel fine. But if you're working it, the first 3 weeks of the season, if he's not healthy and you end up playing a backup, I'm going to watch that position very closely. And maybe one of these guys or one of the freshmen, someone I'm not expecting, is able to step up and looks really, really good and lessens my worry here. But I think this is not a point of stress or constant worry for Duck fans. It is something to monitor. It is absolutely something to monitor, because the idea of having to rotate guys in or trying to figure out who's, playing better, finding the hot hand and whatnot, not being sure at an offensive line position against Ohio State and Michigan does not give me a high level of confidence. Now, is the rest of the offensive line still really good? Yeah, it is. But you're only as strong as your weakest link. And again, if this were happening at the wide receiver position, which I'm going to talk about in the next segment on today's show, I wouldn't have any concern. The drop-off would be so minimal. But do we know what the drop-off is from Bedford, who is not, an NFL or a high NFL draft pick or some first-team all-conference guy, but he's a 6-year veteran. He's got the size. He's got the weight room factor. His PFF grades are solid. They're not incredible, but they're not terrible either. Like, he's solid. You knew what you had there. Now in a full-time starter's role, at the Power 4 level, do you know what you have from Davey Uli? Do you know what you have from Nishad Strother? Or whoever else is going to fill that right guard slot? You don't yet. So it's definitely something to watch over the first few games. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB is the handle. We're talking about wide receivers, or at least I mentioned the wide receivers. And one of you asked a question. Is there going to be an emerging wide receiver in the room this year? That's coming up next. First, let's talk about Ibotta. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do these have in common? You're probably buying a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibotta and get cash back on all of your purchases when you stock up on all your summer essentials. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. As a big proponent of fancy dinners, I am here for that saving of money. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use that code LOCKEDONCollege. For those on YouTube wondering, I am back in Utah. Just a couple tweaks happening to the office. Should be back with the usual setup tomorrow, but let's talk Oregon wide receivers here, because I think this is the most talented Oregon wide receiver room over a 2-year period of my entire life. You have a 4th-round draft pick in Troy Franklin, who might be talking about him a little bit later in today's show when we get to Bo Nix, who just had the best statistical receiving season in the history of Oregon football, set the record for touchdowns, and had tied for the receptions mark with Tez Johnson, also on last year's team. And then Troy Franklin opted out of the bowl game, and then Tez Johnson played in the bowl game, so he set the receptions record. But Franklin only set the record for touchdowns and receiving yards in a single year. But this room is so crazy deep. And to go from Troy Franklin to Evan Stewart, who will probably get drafted higher whenever he declares, whether that's after this season or if he stays for his senior year, than Troy Franklin, pretty crazy. And Junior Adams has done a heck of a job. But Nick sends in this question, which all of you can do as well. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter. Send me a note. If you want priority access, become a Locked On Ducks insider. Go join the flock. That link is in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch this show. Not sure if it's a worthy question. I think it is, Nick. You've talked about overall most likely breakout players. To narrow it down, who do you believe is most likely to break out this year, Dickey or Kasper? Dickey has the hype, and Kasper has some hype, but the time in the program. Just for the heck of it, Harmon/Caldwell, who has the biggest impact this year? We'll get to that second question because I think it's a really interesting one, because those are Oregon's 2 starting defensive tackles. But the Jurrion Dickey, Kyler Kasper question, are either going to break out, I think is a valid point to raise. Of the 2, I'd say Jurrion Dickey has a higher likelihood to have his most impactful season to date, even though it's just his 2nd season of college football. He wasn't really healthy last year. Kyler Kasper was a former highly touted blue chip wideout, wasn't quite as highly rated as Dickey, but still pretty big time recruit. I don't know if you watched the 2nd episode of That Team Out West, but Kyler Kasper made the sort of catch that I have long talked about on this show that he's capable of making and can be a big time receiver for the Ducks. The reason I lean towards Jurrion Dickey is because of the positional versatility. Kasper is in the 6'5", 6'6" sort of range and plays primarily on the outside. That's where he projects to play. I guess we don't truly know because he hasn't been given a major shot yet in the college game. But Jurrion Dickey, one of the reasons he was a more highly touted recruit is that he can play outside and he can play inside. He has a little bit more yards after catch to his game. So when you look at the depth chart for this Oregon wide receiver room, Evan Stewart's going to start at X, Trayshawn Holden starts at Z, and Tez Johnson starts as your slot. Who's backing those guys up? My guess, Kyler Kasper backs up Evan Stewart. Jurrion Dickey backs up probably Tez Johnson, or is it Trayshawn Holden? Depends on where they like him. And Gary Bryant Jr. is in the mix as well. And Gary Bryant Jr. is likely to be Oregon's 4th receiver again this year, as he was a season ago. He and Trayshawn Holden had pretty similar numbers last year, and I'm a big Trayshawn Holden fan. But Kasper has got more guys in front of him that are playing on the perimeter, whereas Gary Bryant Jr., he can play in the slot, but I think that opportunity to have more targets in place of Gary Bryant is more readily available than to get more targets in place of Evan Stewart or Trayshawn Holden. Now, Gary Bryant Jr. could also be a backup Z receiver because he has also played on the outside in his Oregon career and is a very versatile player, much like Jurrion Dickey. I think the two are pretty similar. Dickey, I think, is maybe an inch or two taller and, has some more 50-50 ball capability to his game. At least that's what you see on his high school tape. But another question for Jurrion Dickey, is he going to be healthy? Because he suffered an injury in the spring game. Reports the last reports that I've seen say that he's okay, doing better, but I don't know that we know that 100% certain. And anytime a guy was banged up last year and got banged up and had to leave the spring game, it's easy to raise a question. But if Kyler Kasper is trying to get catches or just get snaps and see the field, and he's got Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden ahead of him, I think it's a lot easier to get snaps over Gary Bryant, who I like, but not as much as the other two, than it is to get snaps on the perimeter. So that's why I'd lean towards Jurrion Dickey. But quite frankly, the answer to this question, I don't expect either to have a major role. Because I watched this receiving core produce at a level that we really haven't seen in the modern era of Oregon football. And you bring in an NFL caliber guy to replace your departed NFL wide receiver, I kind of think that's going to be the rotation. So barring an injury, which is the other consideration, if Evan Stewart, God forbid, were to go down with an injury, Trayshawn Holden probably slides over to the X spot and Gary Bryant Jr. becomes the Z. That'd be my guess. Whereas if Tez Johnson goes down with an injury, they could put Gary into the slot or they could put Dickey into the slot. And I think it's more likely that Dickey would get more reps in the slot than Kasper would get more reps on the perimeter. Just my gut feeling at this point. But do I still like Jurrion Dickey, Kyler Kasper? Yeah, going into 2025, if those two are called upon to be major receiving threats, I'm good with that. Both have got a unique skill set. Both are incredibly talented, and both will be really experienced. I mean, Kyler Kasper is going into his third year of college football and has not had a significant role. Now, maybe Junior Adams increases the frequency of rotations at the wide receiver position this year, but based on the results they had last year, it's kind of hard to argue with it. It's hard to look at that and say, well, you should, really change things up and work more guys in the fold. Really? Do you need to? What was wrong with Oregon's passing game last year? Last I checked, the answer was nothing. So if you go with if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of approach, then I think that limits the time that either guy will see on the field this year. And if one or both stick around in the offseason, decide not to transfer out, come into Oregon next year, yeah, they'd be leading candidates to be starting wide receivers given the experience they have in Eugene already. But going into this year, it's just barring a slew of injuries, it's a tough depth chart to try and crack because it's such a talented room. As for your second question, Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, I'm legitimately at a coin flip here. I know it sounds like I'm not taking a stand, but between the two, Harmon's got a little bit more pedigree. So I'd go 55-45. Derek Harmon has a bigger impact than Jamari Caldwell, just because Caldwell, who was an all Big 12 conference guy, you look at what the Big 12 produces in the trenches compared to what Harmon was going against in the Big 10. Harmon's got more impressive tape when you have that consideration. But I also watched Jamari Caldwell in the spring game. Boy, he looks like a really good football player. And so does Harmon. DJ Harmon as Derek DJ. I think he's going by DJ Harmon. And I'm stoked about both of these additions. Caldwell came in first, and I liked Oregon's defensive line. Harmon came in, and I loved Oregon's defensive line. And I do love it. I think it's the best Oregon defensive line in 10 years since the DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead unit. I don't think there's the high-end talent that those two guys were, but I think the overall depth is much, much stronger for this year's team. And it's why I think Oregon's defense can be so good, because they have a bunch of talent and they have a ton of depth. And I think both of these guys, like I said, 55-45, Derek Harmon, I won't be shocked if it's Caldwell. I will not be shocked. I think whoever has the better statistical season, and it can be hard to put up numbers as a defensive tackle, may very well come down to how Tosh Lupoy and Dan Lanning and Tony Tuioti work their defensive line rotations. How many times do they move Jordan Birch inside? And who does that nudge out? if you want to have a little bit more of a pass rush oriented unit, do you think that's a Jamari Caldwell situation or a DJ Harmon situation to pair with Jordan Birch? Those are your inside guys, and then your outside players are two of the edge rushers that I've talked about at length on the show over the last several months, Tuioti and Purchase and Mateo. Maybe 5-star true freshman Elijah Rushing works his name into the fold. So, I love both of those guys along the defensive line. I think because of the number of talented players Oregon has up there isn't going to be a defensive lineman who puts up some crazy, crazy stats, but I love the unit across the board. Love that question as well. That was a good one. You said, Nick, you gotta give yourself some credit here. You Oregon fans, I love you guys to death because you truly ask great questions that make me think, what do I think about that? I'll tell you what I think about Bo Nix coming up next, because if you aren't excited to watch this guy in the NFL, boy, it sure seems like you should be. First, let's talk about FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. It's not number 2. It's not number 3, which is what Oregon is in the AP poll. They're number 1. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I don't know what else you need to get ready for football season. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Plus, they've got everything you want for college football. Win totals, Oregon's is 10.5, tied for the highest in all of college football. National title odds, Oregon, top 5 in the country, not bad. Conference championship odds, Oregon, number 2 in the Big Ten. A lot of excitement for this year. FanDuel agrees. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's number one sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Go check out FanDuel today. All right, I wanted to wrap with a little Bo Nix talk here because until Justin Herbert, I don't think the narrative around Oregon quarterbacks in the NFL was particularly strong. But that seems to be changing in a hurry, so long as you're wearing the number 10. Because Herbert, we know, superstar. And Bo Nix, it's just the NFL preseason. I'm not all aboard, he's going to win Rookie of the Year. He's going to be... The only thing that I can confidently say about Bo Nix right now and the way it's being covered and talked about and what I've seen in the film he's putting out there, he should be the week 1 starter. I've seen Jarrett Stidham. I've seen Zach Wilson. Bo Nix should be the starting quarterback for the Broncos week 1. Now, some of you who know me quite well, maybe all the everydayers out there, may remember that I will have a conflict of interest for 1 week and 1 week only for Bo Nix this year. And this is partially true. For those who are unaware, I am, just as every bit as I am a diehard Ducks fan, I am a diehard Seahawks fan. And week 1, the Seahawks play the Broncos. I would very much like for the Seahawks to win that game because I want my team to win the Super Bowl like I want Oregon to win the national championship. I will say my desire for Oregon to win is slightly greater because the Seahawks gave me that one Super Bowl back in the 2013-14 season. We won't talk about what happened the season after. But I think Bo Nix can prove a lot of people wrong if he translates what he has done in the preseason. Last preseason game he played, 8 of 9 for 90 yards and a touchdown. You bring that over to the regular season, and all the people said, you don't throw the ball down the field, Bo Nix is not this, Bo Nix is not that. I thought Chris Collinsworth made a really good point on Colin Cowherd's show. I saw the clip going around Twitter the other day, which is that Bo Nix in college ran an NFL offense in that it was based on timing. And Sean Payton's offenses have always been based around timing, accuracy, and scheme. That's what he was doing last year. One of the reasons, I've heard Joel Klatt talk about this before. One of the reasons Dylan Gabriel's a good fit in this Oregon offense is he is a highly efficient quarterback. This past year, he wasn't that always in his career, but he's a very experienced veteran guy. And this past year, he completed just under 70% of his passes. I think this year he will be over 70%. One of the reasons that that's the case is twofold. Number one, Oregon, each of the last 2 years, has had a quarterback complete over 70% of his passes. That was Bo Nix with 2 different guys, but Will Stein as the offensive coordinator returning, guy that I really like, and we'll see how long he's able to stick around at Oregon because he looks to be a really good offensive coordinator. Joel Klatt talks about Dylan Gabriel as more of a point guard, more of a facilitator in the offense, and that's why Bo Nix was so good. And I appreciated that Collinsworth made that remark about Bo Nix and said, well, it was a lot of timing based and, the way he read defenses. And I like hearing that because that's what we all saw. It's not what everybody sees, but I think it's what a lot of us saw last year with Bo is he read defenses so well. He knew before the snap, and it's going to be harder in the NFL. I'm not going to deny that, but he's picking up on it really quickly in the preseason. And if he turns out to be the sort of quarterback that we all know he's capable of being, it's going to be really fun to watch. And at some point in time when I remember one of my favorite NFL games to watch ever, Mariota was with the Raiders, Herbert was with the Chargers, and they were battling it out on either Thursday, Sunday, or Monday Night Football. It was a nationally televised game. That was the best game. I loved that as an Oregon fan. It was so much fun to watch. And I think Bo Nix has the potential with Sean Payton and the weapons they've got in Denver. Their offensive line might be a little suspect, but that could be a really, really fun watch for several years. And relating it back to the current state of Oregon football, that sort of stuff always helps. When you have a player that has that sort of visibility, that sort of name brand recognition that goes on to succeed on the recruiting trip. I mean, think about Oregon recruiting wide receivers. Junior Adams has revolutionized that position. And putting a guy like Troy Franklin in the NFL, if Bo Nix reaches his maximum potential, we know he's got the chemistry with Troy Franklin. If they start to make it work, that sort of stuff, it works. It helps. Ohio State's got a reputation of wide receiver U. LSU and Bama for a long time are where all the high-level DBs went. Now they tend to go to Georgia, but I think that sort of stuff can help. It's not, a revolutionizing element to the recruiting trail for a particular position, but does it help? Yeah. And also, is it fun for Oregon fans? Yeah. I've talked with a lot of you out there who are sending me stuff about, look how well Bo Nix is doing, look at what Bo's doing, or look at how good Herbert is. Or a couple of you have asked me like, hey, how good do you think Harbaugh is going to be with Herbert and the Chargers? My answer is I think they're going to be awesome because Jim Harbaugh is a really, really good coach. The roster doesn't stink and Herbert's a stud. Good ingredients right there. I love watching Oregon players go on to the pros. I always have, particularly at the quarterback position. And Caleb Williams has also made some highlights, but Bo Nix is quite literally the second most talked about rookie quarterback of the draft class as we've moved through the preseason because Penix isn't going to play. He's sitting behind Kirk Cousins, which is the Falcons. Oh, the Falcons. So Falcons. And then Jaden Daniels is in Washington. And other than one really good throw he made, I haven't heard him getting nearly as much buzz. So I hope Bo Nix crushes it. I think it'd be a great look for Oregon and Will Stein and the program that Dan Lanning is running. And it's just fun to watch the old #ProDucks. Appreciate the questions. Keep them coming. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or if you want to become a Locked On Ducks insider, go join the subtext down in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. I want to thank all of you for making this your first listen of the day, or view if you're watching on YouTube. Go make Locked On College Football your second. I host over there, giving you the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Everything you need to know about the sport every single day. Go check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.